Turn, if you will, to Exodus chapter 34. Exodus 34. Could we have the rest of those lights on, please? That would be helpful. Thank you. Carl mentioned a moment ago we have 35 people in Honduras, led by Jack Whidden, one of our ministers, and a number of you were gathered here at the building Thursday as we prayed for them and sent them out as a church. And I want to encourage us to be praying for our sons and daughters and in some cases husbands and wives who are there. This is the last Sunday that I'll be here for a little while, about to go on a couple of weeks of vacation and a couple of weeks of study break, and really glad to be doing that. Charlotte's going to get back Wednesday. She's been taking care of her mother in Alabama for a while, and I'm ready for her to come back. But while we're gone, Scott Talley, Jack Whidden, Scott Prather, and Mike Stegmoller all will be preaching, not on the same Sunday, but all will be preaching, and or each will be preaching, and you will enjoy them. And I would ask you to keep Charlotte and myself in your prayer as we're out. And this is always a very, especially this July, always a very significant time for both of us. And for myself, in terms of our ministry here, just an opportunity to think through again what we're doing and why we're doing it, and what's ahead for the coming year. I don't want to let this moment go by because I won't have the opportunity again to just thank and recognize Don and Joanne Hall for just many years of friendship here. Your Dad and Mom and Grandpa and Grandma are just a very important part of this church family. Don was a part of the elder group when we moved here 19 years ago, and he and Joanne, along with the rest of the elders, just bent over backwards to accommodate us and help us as we moved here. And anyway, you have just given yourselves to the people of this church, both in the past and in the present, and we just wish you the best in your future. Okay, Exodus 34. We've spent this month reflecting on some important questions that families need to be asking, and hopefully one or more of these questions will be helpful to you. The first week, we asked I suggested that families ought to be asking the first question ever asked a human being: where are you? And right here at the end of June, as we're getting ready to bump into July, this would be a great time before school begins and the academic year begins to ask that question: where are we as a family, and where am I personally? Second question: who are we? Who are we? The identity question: who are we? Where do we get our identity? Third question today: will we go the distance? Will we go the distance? I don't have to tell you that lots of folks are fearful and anxious and stressed, and some of this has to do with what goes on or what is going on in their families, maybe in their marriage, maybe with one of the children, maybe with mother and dad. Sometimes we feel trapped and tested. But if you don't hear anything else this morning, I want you to hear this. The good news is Jesus Christ has brought about the new Exodus. We are free from the kind of bondage that can just make our lives miserable. Okay? We're going to unpack that a little bit this morning as we think about, as a family, as husbands or wives, as sons or daughters, are we ready to go the distance? And I would ask you to be thinking about that as a church. Are we going to go the distance together? Exodus 34. Look at verse 1 if you would. Exodus 34, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first one, and I will write on them the words that were on the first tablets which you broke." Now, we won't go into that, but we've kind of been down this trail before, and in terms of writing these commandments, and we don't have those anymore, but we're going to come at it again here. Be ready in the morning and then come up on Mount Sinai. Present yourself to me there on top of the mountain. No one is to come with you or be seen anywhere on the mountain, not even the flocks and herds may graze in front of the mountain. So Moses chiseled out 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and went up Mount Sinai early in the morning as the Lord had commanded him. And he carried the 2 stone tablets in his hands. And then the Lord came down in the cloud and stood there with him and proclaimed his name, the Lord. And he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming. Now, this is the next few lines I've underlined in my Bible. The Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness and rebellion and sin. And yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the fathers to the 3rd and the 4th generation. Families, I think, need to be asking the question, as dads and moms and husbands and wives, will we go the distance? Husbands and wives need to ask that question. Are we going to go the distance with one another, or will one of us bail? And children need to know that my daddy and my mother are going to go the distance here. If you're a single parent, they need to know Mama won't leave us. Daddy won't leave us. If you're a single parent, male or female, they're here to stay. They're going to go the distance. It's kind of hard when, by the way, when I look over here, I realize a bunch of you are gone, but you guys are it this morning, okay? All right. When your brothers or sisters, if you got them, when they grow up, or you got little brothers or little sisters, one of you grows up and you get married, and you leave, and you kind of wonder what's going to happen with my sister now, or what's going to happen with my brother now. And there's something to be said for siblings to assure other siblings, we're going to go the distance with you. Nothing's going to change. We will continue to be, you're always going to be my brother or my sister. And as a church, it's so important that we go the distance with one another. Anybody ever been disappointed by people in church? Of course. And if you haven't yet, stick around. You're around flawed humans. Don't think it's totally weird when people don't always act right. Well, I got to go look at another church because, there's nothing around but a bunch of flawed people. The question is, will we go the distance with one another? Well, here's this remarkable story here of God's faithfulness, God's grace. 430 years, God's people are in slavery. 430 years. Sometimes when we pray and we don't see anything happening for 3 months, we're asking questions about the existence of God. 430 years of making bricks and being mistreated by Pharaoh. God's grace and God's faithfulness have not slowed down one bit. It's just that He's not on our timetable. Well, God raises up Moses to lead them out of slavery and out of oppression and out of futility. And they're en route to the promised land. And God is giving them law, precious law. Remember David's words? Oh, how I love thy law. Law, which gives them some direction in their lives and to know how to live. And God, in this moment in which He's giving law to Moses for the people, describes Himself. Verse 6. Compassionate and gracious. Compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, forgiving wickedness and rebellion and sin. On your order of worship on the backside, if you want to look at that for a moment. No wonder consider how God describes Himself. Number one, merciful and compassionate. Merciful and compassionate. The root word here often describes the relationship of parents toward their children. This is God's own self-description. And He says, I am a merciful and compassionate God. Number two, He describes Himself as gracious. This comes from the root typically translated grace. Enables one who has it all or who has more to bless someone who has less or nothing. God is a gracious God. God's grace is evident from Genesis through Revelation. Again and again and again. God's grace. Third, God says, I am slow to anger. Long-suffering and patient. Y'all ever known somebody who kind of had a quick trigger when it came to their temper? That's not God. When you read about the wrath of God or God's punishment, God's wrath or God's punishment, that's not something, where God blew His top one day and punished. No. God's wrath is deliberate. It's not an explosion. He's slow to anger. Number four, God describes Himself as abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. There is a word in the Old Testament, you could pronounce it in English something like this, kesed, and it's used almost 250 times in the Old Testament. And in the Revised Standard Translation, and I think the New Revised as well, it's typically translated steadfast love. God's steadfast love is about God initiating His relationship with you. God initiating relationship with you. Now God is saying in Exodus 34, this is who I am. This is who I am. And basically what He's saying is, I am a God who goes the distance. I'm a God that goes the distance. I am a God who is gracious and merciful and abounding in love and slow to anger and full of steadfast love. Remember the writer of Lamentations. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. So, if that's the character of God, think about, what does this mean for my own character? Let's ask the question number one, will we go the distance with our families? Now we're going to look at one more passage, Hebrews chapter 13, or one more book, rather, Hebrews chapter 13. Watch your promises there. Hebrews 13. Will it go the distance? If you and I were to share our stories this moment, we're a large enough group right now that there are lots of stories right in this room, of growing up in homes where one day daddy left or mother left. Some of you know what it is like to have a spouse leave. In what you wanted, in what you desired, that's what this person chose to do, and she left or he left. In a world where parents will leave and husbands and wives will leave, is it possible that God, working through His church, could create another kind of people, a people who will go the distance? Hebrews chapter 13. All through the book of Hebrews, God has been saying again and again and again through this writer that everything that I was doing, as recorded in our Old Testament, is leading up to the moment of Jesus. That this is not some sort of contradiction between the old and the new. Rather, this is continuation. There is plenty of continuity. Is there some discontinuity? Yes. But there's plenty of continuity. And all of this occurred because of the faithfulness and the grace of God. Chapters 12 and 13 are the so what part. What difference does this make? Now look at 13:1. In other words, since God has been faithful, since God has now fulfilled so many promises in Christ, here's what you are to do. Keep on loving each other as brothers. Let God's character make a difference in how you treat other believers. And then do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing, some people have entertained angels without knowing it. That's one of those verses where we all need to together go, makes me think. Let's keep reading. Remember those in prison as if you were their fellow prisoners. I love this. He doesn't say remember those in prison because you've been smarter than they are, or you're on top of it and they're kind of on the ground there. He says you need to think of what if you were their fellow prisoner? And remember those who were mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. Now look at verse 4. Marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure. For God will judge the adulterer and all the sexually immoral. All that Christ did, fulfilling the promises of God in the Old Testament, has led to this moment where God is announcing, I want you to have a new view of relationships, and that begins with your marriage. I want you to go the distance. And I want you to go the distance in terms of the most intimate, one of the most intimate parts of your marriage. I want your sexual relationship in your marriage to be a place of honor. And notice the first line. Marriage should be honored by all. As a married man, I need to make sure that my behavior honors my own marriage. But as I talk to people of the opposite sex, I need to make sure that I'm honoring her marriage. We're not in the business of getting in the way of anybody's marriage, beginning with our own. And the idea here is that God was willing to go the distance. God is faithful, and He wants us to be faithful as well. Now, I know this might sound dated, and I know this might sound whatever, I don't know how to sugarcoat this one. This is just as applicable as it's always been. Adultery is still wrong because it does not reflect the faithfulness of God. Turn, if you would, to 1 Corinthians 7 for a moment. 1 Corinthians 7. And look at verse 1. Now, for the matters you wrote about, it is good for a man not to marry. But since there's so much immorality, that sounds like an understatement, each man ought to have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. And the husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. And in the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife. And do not deprive each other except by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Part of going the distance in marriage is, I'm going to use this word, ministering to one another in one of the most intimate ways that God created. And yes, it is a ministry. It is a way we serve one another. There is to be no game playing. There is to be no, some healthy, normal person should not one day just kind of willy-nilly decide we won't be doing that anymore. Come on. Paul addresses this. All of this is a part of going the distance with one another in family and in marriage. But I want to ask a final question. Are we ready to go the distance as disciples of Christ? Are we going to go the distance in terms of my walk with God? I'm sure you guys know this over here, but I was looking, in fact, it was yesterday. There was this, I can't remember where this study comes from offhand, but talking about the number of people who are a part of good youth groups like ours, and within years, just completely check out of anything related to faith altogether. Wow, you know that. It's staggering. But it's not just high school folks. It's folks who used to be deacons in churches. And sometimes folks who used to be elders in churches. And sometimes folks who used to preach. And sometimes it's mothers who grew up taking their children to Bible school, and now they're just kind of in their own orbit, and fathers doing the same thing. Will we go the distance? I love Hebrews chapter 11. We'll stop this. Really, we won't go anywhere after Hebrews. I love this Hebrews chapter 11 here, where, again, these promises of the Old Testament have been fulfilled in Christ. God has gone the distance. He has not given up on His people and not given up on blessing the world. And then begins to speak of people throughout time who lived by learning to trust in the Lord, or faith. Faith is being sure of what we hope for. This is verse 1 of chapter 11. And certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what was seen was not made out of what was visible. And he talks about Abel offering God a better sacrifice. And he begins to list person after person. Abel and Enoch and Noah. And these people are not the moral exemplars. These are not, God's Hall of Fame. The people who live these perfect lives, who just did it all right. Let's think about some of these people for a minute. All these are listed in Hebrews 11. Abel, Enoch, Noah. Then there's Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph. And then he speaks of the faith of Moses in chapter 11. And then he speaks of the faith of the Israelites. Y'all remember this? Where the Israelites trusted God to the point that they stepped into this river that somehow became dry land. That's one of those one day that I want to ask the Lord for some sort of rerun on film if we could see that one again. Surely there's a way to see these things. They walked across by faith. And then there was the group of people, do you remember this story where they walked or marched around the walls of Jericho? What y'all's church going to do? Marching around Waco. Got a taco truck bringing them food later. But people would think that's ridiculous. Listen, I'm very serious. People would think that is absolutely ridiculous. When you're a person who trusts God, you will often do what others think is absolutely ridiculous. And they did that. They marched around those walls until they fell. And then, let's be quiet here, there was Rahab. And she was a prostitute. And she is singled out for moments when she dared to trust the Lord with her life. Well, from there is Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, these judges. And then David and Samuel and the prophets. And he begins to describe the way believers were put to death. These are people who went the distance. And I think that's the question we need to grapple with. Will we go the distance? Chapter 12, verse 1. I love this. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who, for the joy set before him, endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him. Think about him. Ponder on his life, who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. I don't know what your year has been like, but if it's like some folks I know, you've had a tough year. Maybe a tough year in your marriage. Maybe a tough year with a sickness that's just tearing up your loved one's body. Maybe it's been a tough year financially. Maybe it's been a tough year in terms of a friendship that's just seemed to falling apart. Is it hard? Yes, it's hard. But God is faithful, and God will be with us to go the distance. back of your order of worship, this is the take home. And what I want to ask you to do is be praying about one of these three that you might especially need to hear this morning. Number one, get rid of heavy weights. Get rid of heavy weights. L-I-G, let it go. Let go of that stinking resentment you've got. Let go of sin. Let go of some of the addictions. And yes, you may need to get some help for that. But at least up front say, I want to let it go. I want to let it go. I want to let go of my immaturity. I want to let go of my stinking self-centeredness at home. I want to let it go. So I'm telling you, like the writer says, those weights will drag you down. It'll drag you down. And daddies and mamas, I'm so proud of some of you. And one of the ways you bless your children is by, and you show that, number one, just by being here, but by just communicating, we're in this race. I'm sorry, Daddy's not here. I'm your mama, and I'm doing the best I can. But guys, we're going to make it. I'm sorry you're living with your grandparents, but that's the way it is right now. But we're going to make it. We're going to go the distance together. Tell your knot-headed husband that. Or your knot-headed wife that. And yes, I know she needs to work on her stuff, and you do too. But we're in this together. Second, have patience. Boy, the Lord said He was slow to anger. Patient. Slow to anger. I don't know how much you've taken in your life. And I say this with a lot of respect and sympathy because a lot of you have endured a lot. But I do want to remind you that nobody in here has taken what Jesus Christ has taken. Nobody. You say, well, are you discounting what I've been through? No. What I'm saying is you've got someone to reach up to. Always knowing that He's ahead of you. So be patient. And finally, number three, keep your eyes on the end. Keep your eyes on the end. And what is the end? What is the end for raising our children? The end is not happiness. The end is not finally getting him in this wonderful house in the DFW area. What is the end? The end is to see them loving God and living in obedience to God and being a disciple of Christ and raising, should the Lord bless them with children, raising godly children. I want to keep my eyes on the end. On the end. I love this next story. You saw this a few weeks ago, I think. 17-year-old Megan Vogel. She would be the person on your right. Running in a race in Ohio. This was actually a state meet. And this was a 3,200-meter race. And she is in last place, Megan Vogel. Well, earlier she had run the 1,600-meter race, and she had won the thing. But she said, by the time this race came up, I was out of gas. There was a young girl ahead of her from another school, another team. Her name is Arden. And Megan said it looked like Arden was about to collapse. And Megan walked up to Arden and put her arm around her shoulder. This is not a teammate. This is somebody you're trying to beat. And basically helped carry her 30 meters to the finish line. When she got to the finish line, Megan made sure that Arden was ahead of her so that Arden wouldn't finish last. I love this line Megan told one news source. If you work to get to the state meet, you deserve to finish, no matter who you are. And I was going to make that happen for her, no matter what. If we're going to go the distance, it won't be alone. And some of you know what it's like to try to walk with the Lord alone. I mean, you kind of been there, done that. That's tough. We need one another. We need this congregation. One of the things I've got this little tag on my computer to remind me of something. This little tag reads like this. You didn't expect, one more time, you didn't expect applause, did you? I need to look at that sometimes. I came home not long ago. Now, we're empty nesters, Scott. I came home not long ago and I told Charlotte, you know what I've been doing lately? I just started telling her everything I'd been doing in the house. I mean, she needed to know. I don't know if she knew I had washed that many loads or that I had cleaned out my side of the closet. And I kind of went through all that. She just kind of looked at me and she said, well, okay. I thought, oh, I hate that. I thought, what am I doing? Do I expect applause? You know, one of the things I think is so important for us to learn as people, and you know this, but don't we just need to say it sometimes? Life does not orbit around you. Have you noticed that? Do you realize people are not getting up in the morning, drinking their coffee and saying, I wonder what Jim is doing this morning? Yeah. People are living their own lives. And so what I want to do, if I'm going to help others go the distance, I got to get myself off my mind and be thinking about who needs some encouragement. What dad or what mother, what young daughter needs encouragement? All right, that's enough of that, isn't it? But would you think about this? These are 3 questions we've asked during the month of June that I think are important for families. And let's not just assume we'll go to the distance. I think there's a place for some husbands to stand up and tell their families that. I'm not going anywhere. And some room for some mothers to do that as well. Okay, we're going to sing. It could be that you just need to pray. Boy, you just need to be, you're in prayer at home about a certain grandchild, and you just like to pray with one of our shepherds about that boy. And there will be some of these folks at the back, and I encourage you to go to them and pray. Mike Coates will be here at the front. You can come pray with him. Boy, if you need to just, you don't really know where to begin, but you know that things aren't really where they need to be at home, start by just praying about that. You just may need to go to one of these elders and just say, I just want you to thank God. I'm a single mother, and God has gotten me through the week. I just want you to thank God for that. If you're ready to be baptized into Christ, we can assist you with that this morning. Well, let's stand and sing for a moment.
Turn my heart